He paid for her coffee when her card was declined, not knowing she was a millionaire CEO who'd been through more than anyone could imagine. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. It was an ordinary morning in a bustling coffee shop. The air was filled with the comforting hum of conversations and the smell of freshly brewed coffee. Lena stood in line, her fingers nervously tapping on the edge of her purse. She had just come from an important meeting and needed a moment to clear her head. As she reached the counter, she ordered her usual, black coffee, extra hot. But when the cashier rang up the total, Lena's stomach sank. She reached for her wallet, but when she pulled out her card and handed it to the cashier, the machine beeped in protest. "I'm sorry, your card has been declined," the cashier said, her voice polite but firm. Lena's face turned crimson. She had never been in this situation before. With a tight smile, she fumbled for her phone, hoping to transfer money, but the Wi-Fi signal was weak, and the app refused to load. The cashier's eyes drifted toward the line behind her, and Lena felt the weight of a dozen eyes on her. Just as she was about to apologize and leave, a voice broke through her embarrassment. "I'll pay for her coffee," said a man standing behind her. Startled, Lena turned to see a tall figure, his dark hair perfectly styled and his business suit crisp. He smiled warmly at her. "Don't worry about it. It's on me." Lena hesitated for a moment. She didn't want to accept charity from a stranger, especially not in such an awkward moment, but something in his eyes made her pause. Maybe it was his calm demeanor or the kindness in his voice. After a brief moment, she nodded. "Thank you," she said, trying to keep the embarrassment from showing in her voice. The man handed his credit card to the cashier and winked at Lena. "No problem," he said, his smile never faltering. As Lena collected her coffee and stepped aside, she couldn't help but notice how out of place he seemed in the coffee shop. He looked more like someone who belonged in a high-rise office, not standing in line for a cup of coffee. Lena took a sip, feeling the warmth spread through her chest, but her thoughts kept returning to the man who had paid for her. Why would someone so polished and put together offer to help a stranger like that? Little did she know, the man who had helped her was no ordinary person. Ethan was a millionaire CEO, and the reason he was at that coffee shop was far from simple. He wasn't just trying to do a good deed, he had been searching for someone like Lena, someone who didn't judge him for his wealth, someone who could see the real him. And now, their paths had crossed, but Lena had no idea who he really was. Irene sat down at a small table by the window, her laptop open in front of her, but her thoughts were far away. She couldn't shake the feeling of that unexpected encounter earlier at the coffee shop. Ethan's face kept resurfacing in her mind, his calm demeanor, his quiet generosity. It wasn't just the gesture of paying for her coffee that lingered, it was the way he had looked at her, like he saw her, really saw her, in a way no one else had in a long time. She couldn't help but wonder who he really was. Maybe he was just another businessman with too much money, but there was something about him that didn't add up. He didn't seem like the type to just throw his wealth around carelessly. Irene had seen people like that before, people who used their money as a shield, a way to control others. But Ethan wasn't like that. She hadn't known why at the time, but there was a calm honesty about him, a sincerity that made her feel something stir inside her. Still, she couldn't deny her skepticism. The whole situation had been so strange, so unexpected. She had been on the edge of a financial crisis when the card had been declined, and there he was, a stranger who'd paid for her coffee without a second thought. It felt almost too good to be true. As she closed her laptop and grabbed her coat, Irene reminded herself that she had to get to work. She had bills to pay, a life to manage. No time for distractions, especially not distractions that might lead to disappointment. However, fate seemed to have other plans. The next day, as Irene walked down the busy street toward her office, she saw him again. Ethan was standing outside a sleek, glass building, talking to a group of well-dressed people. She froze, her heart racing in her chest. Could it be? Was he the same person? The man who had helped her the day before? She hesitated, unsure of what to do. Should she approach him? Pretend like she hadn't seen him? Her feet moved before her brain could catch up, and she found herself walking toward him. Ethan's eyes lit up when he saw her. "Hey, it's you," he said with a warm smile, as though they were old friends. What a coincidence. Irene smiled awkwardly, unsure of how to respond. "Yeah, it is," she said, glancing down at her shoes. "I didn't expect to see you here." Ethan chuckled softly. "I come to this building every day for work. I guess we're neighbors now." Irene looked up at the building behind him. It was tall, modern, the kind of place where successful professionals worked. It made sense. If Ethan was really who he claimed to be, then he would work in a place like this. But there was still something that didn't sit right with Irene. He had seemed so normal the day before, so humble. And now here he was, standing in front of a fancy building, talking like it was just another day at the office. It made her wonder, was this who he really was, or was this just an act? Ethan noticed her hesitation and raised an eyebrow. "What's on your mind?" he asked, his tone soft. Irene opened her mouth to say something, but words failed her. She didn't know how to explain the doubt that had settled in her mind. "I don't know," she said finally, feeling a little embarrassed. "It's just... I didn't expect you to be so different." Ethan gave her a curious look. "Different how?" Irene hesitated, but then shrugged. "I don't know. Yesterday, you were just a guy who helped me when my card was declined. And now, you're standing in front of this building, like you're some big shot." Ethan laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "I get it," he said. "It's a lot to take in, huh?" He seemed to consider his words carefully. "The truth is, I don't like to flaunt my success. I've been in situations where people treat me differently because of my money. And I get it, it's natural, I guess. But I don't want that. I want people to see me for who I am, not what I have." Irene blinked, taken aback by his honesty. She hadn't expected that. She had expected him to brush her off, to make some excuse, but instead, he was being open with her. It was refreshing. "I don't know what to say," she said, her voice quiet. "I'm not used to people being so open with me." Ethan smiled. "I'm not used to being open with anyone either. But there's something about you, Irene. You seem real. You don't judge people based on what they have or don't have." Irene felt her heart skip a beat. She hadn't expected him to say that. It was like he could see right through her, to the person she was beneath the surface. It made her wonder if maybe there was more to him than she had realized. Maybe, just maybe, they could get to know each other better. And as much as she tried to convince herself that it was a bad idea, that she had too much going on in her life to get involved with anyone, something inside her whispered that she shouldn't let this chance slip away. So, she smiled back at Ethan. "Maybe we could grab lunch sometime," she said. Ethan's eyes lit up again, his smile widening. "I'd like that." And just like that, a simple gesture, a cup of coffee, a kind smile, had led them to something new. Something that neither of them had expected, but both of them were willing to explore. Irene walked into the small cafe on the corner, a familiar spot where she liked to unwind after a long day. She had agreed to meet Ethan for lunch, and though she tried to convince herself it was just a casual meeting between two people who happened to meet by chance, her heart raced a little faster than usual. She was nervous, but it wasn't the kind of nervous that came from insecurity. No, this felt different. Ethan had made her feel seen in a way no one else had in years. She couldn't deny the connection they shared, the way their conversations had flowed so easily, the way she felt when she was around him. As she stepped inside, the familiar warmth of the cafe wrapped around her like a hug. The smell of freshly baked pastries and roasted coffee beans made her feel at ease. She scanned the room, her eyes landing on the man sitting by the window. Ethan stood up as soon as he saw her, his broad smile lighting up his face. "I'm glad you could make it," he said as he pulled out the chair for her. Irene smiled and sat down, feeling both the comfort of their previous encounters and the weight of the unspoken questions hanging in the air. "So, how's work been?" Ethan asked, picking up his coffee cup. Irene hesitated for a moment before answering. "It's been fine. Busy, like always." She smiled, trying to keep things light. Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "Yeah, I get it. I can relate. The world doesn't stop moving, does it?" Irene chuckled, but there was a slight edge to her laughter. She didn't want to talk about work, not right now. Not when there was something else on her mind. She took a deep breath before speaking. "Can I ask you something, Ethan?" He looked at her, his expression softening. "Of course. Anything." Irene's fingers traced the edge of her coffee cup as she carefully chose her words. "I've been thinking a lot about us. And about you. About what happened the other day, when you helped me at the coffee shop." Ethan raised an eyebrow, but there was no trace of discomfort in his gaze. "You don't need to thank me for that, Irene. I told you before, I'm just trying to be a decent person." Irene shook her head, her heart beating a little faster. "No, it's not that. It's just, I don't understand why you did it. Why would someone like you, someone so successful, help someone like me? Someone who's just struggling to make ends meet." Ethan's smile faded slightly, and for a moment, he seemed to be choosing his words with care. "You know," he began, "I think you're looking at this all wrong." Irene frowned, not sure where this conversation was going. "What do you mean?" Ethan leaned forward, his eyes serious now. "I didn't help you because you're struggling. I helped you because I saw something in you that I don't see in a lot of people. You're real, Irene. You're not trying to impress anyone or pretend to be something you're not. And in a world where everyone's so focused on their own image, that's rare." Irene felt a lump form in her throat. She had no idea how to respond. She had never thought of herself that way, not really. Sure, she'd tried to stay true to herself, but who was she kidding? She had been trying to survive, to keep everything together, to look like she had it all under control. But maybe she didn't. Maybe Ethan was right. Ethan took a sip of his coffee, his eyes never leaving hers. "I know it's hard to believe, but I didn't pay for your coffee to get something in return. I don't need anything from you, Irene. I just wanted to help." Irene swallowed, feeling a strange mix of gratitude and vulnerability. She wasn't used to someone being so open with her, especially not someone like Ethan. He was successful, powerful, and yet here he was, sharing his thoughts with her so freely. She couldn't help but wonder, what was he looking for? What did he want from her? "And what about you, Irene?" Ethan's voice broke through her thoughts. "What do you want?" She blinked, caught off guard by the question. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what do you want out of life? Out of this," he gestured between them. "Out of us." Irene looked down at her hands, unsure of how to answer. She had spent so much time focusing on what she needed to do to survive, to keep going, that she hadn't really thought about what she wanted. She didn't know what to say. "I don't know," she admitted softly. "I've always just focused on getting by. Keeping my job, paying my bills, staying afloat. I guess I never really thought about what comes after that." Ethan smiled, a small, understanding smile. "Maybe that's why we're here," he said gently. "Maybe it's time to start thinking about what comes after. For both of us." Irene felt her chest tighten at the thought. She wasn't sure if she was ready to open up to someone like him, but at the same time, something in her told her that maybe this was exactly what she needed. Maybe it was time to stop just surviving and start living. As they continued talking, Irene realized that what she had initially thought was just a random encounter might actually be something more. Something that could change both of their lives. Ethan was no longer just a stranger who had helped her with a cup of coffee. He was someone who saw her, really saw her, in a way no one else had in a long time. And for the first time in a while, Irene felt like maybe, just maybe, she could allow herself to dream of something more. Something that wasn't just about getting by, but about living fully. Irene sat in the quiet corner of the cafe, her hands wrapped around her warm cup of coffee, lost in thought. The conversation with Ethan from earlier still echoed in her mind. She couldn't believe how easily the words had flowed between them. For the first time in a long while, she felt like someone truly understood her. Ethan's offer to help, not out of pity but out of a genuine desire to see her succeed, stirred something inside her. She had spent so much of her life guarding herself from others, convinced that no one would care enough to see past her struggles. But Ethan, with all his success, had done exactly that. He saw her. And he wanted to help. Irene couldn't help but wonder, what was it that drew him to her? Was it just the kindness he saw, or was there something more? She didn't know, but she was determined to find out. As she finished her coffee, she stood up to leave, but a familiar voice stopped her in her tracks. "Hey, Irene!" Ethan called, walking toward her with a warm smile. "How about dinner tonight? I know a great place." Irene smiled, her heart skipping a beat. "Dinner sounds nice," she said. "I'd like that." That evening, Irene found herself seated across from Ethan at a cozy restaurant, the soft glow of candlelight casting a romantic ambience around them. She felt a flutter in her chest as their conversation flowed effortlessly. They spoke about their pasts, their dreams, and their hopes for the future. Irene was surprised by how open Ethan was. He wasn't just talking about business or superficial things, he was talking about his own fears and insecurities, his struggles with maintaining connections in a world that constantly saw him as a figure of power and wealth. For the first time in a long while, Irene felt like she wasn't the only one with walls built up around her. As they ate, Ethan leaned forward slightly, his expression serious but warm. "I know you have your own reasons for being cautious," he said, his voice low. "I respect that. But I want you to know, I'm not just here to be a nice guy who pays for coffee and moves on. I'm here because I see something in you. You're real. And that's rare." Irene felt her heart tighten at his words. She hadn't realized just how much she needed to hear that, how much she had been craving validation, someone to truly see her for who she was. But she still had doubts. She couldn't just throw caution to the wind and trust him completely. She had been burned before, by people who seemed genuine at first but turned out to have their own agendas. "I don't know what you want from me, Ethan," she said softly, looking down at her plate. "I don't want to be just some charity case, someone you feel sorry for." Ethan reached across the table and gently took her hand in his. "I don't feel sorry for you, Irene. I admire you. You've built your life from the ground up. You're strong, independent. And that's something I don't take lightly." Irene looked up at him, meeting his gaze. There was no pity in his eyes, only sincerity. "But what happens after that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What happens when you've helped someone, when you've been there for them, but they're not sure if they can trust you? What happens when someone like me doesn't know what to do with all the kindness?" Ethan smiled gently, his thumb brushing across the back of her hand. "I think we take it one step at a time. I'm not asking for anything from you, Irene. Just trust. Just give me a chance to show you who I really am. And maybe, just maybe, we can figure this out together." Irene sat back in her chair, taking a deep breath. She had never felt so conflicted before. Part of her wanted to pull away, to run, to protect herself from the possibility of disappointment. But another part of her, a part she hadn't heard in a long time, felt something warm stir in her chest. Ethan wasn't like anyone she had ever met. He wasn't perfect, but he was real. And for the first time, she felt like she could let her guard down, even just a little. "Okay," she said finally, her voice steady but soft. "I'll give you a chance." Ethan's eyes lit up, a smile spreading across his face. "Thank you, Irene," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "I promise you won't regret it." As they finished their meal, the connection between them felt deeper, stronger. Irene wasn't sure where this would lead, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was taking a step toward something good. Something that wasn't just about surviving, but about living. As they left the restaurant, Ethan walked her to her car, his hand lightly brushing against hers. They both stood there for a moment, the night air cool and quiet around them. "I'll see you soon?" Ethan asked, his voice soft. Irene nodded, a smile tugging at her lips. "Yeah. I'd like that." As she drove home, she couldn't help but feel a sense of hope growing inside her. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something new, something that could change her life forever. Irene spent the next few days thinking about Ethan and their growing connection. She couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted inside her, something that made her feel both excited and terrified at the same time. She had always prided herself on being self-sufficient, on handling everything on her own. But with Ethan, everything felt different. The walls she had built around herself, the ones that kept people at a distance, felt like they were starting to crack. And the more she tried to ignore it, the more she realized that she couldn't. That night, as she got ready for bed, her phone buzzed with a message. It was from Ethan. "I was thinking, how about a weekend getaway? I know a great place upstate. Just the two of us, no work, no distractions. What do you say?" Irene stared at the screen, the offer catching her off guard. She wasn't sure what she had expected from Ethan, but this? A weekend getaway? It felt like a big step, too soon maybe, but part of her couldn't deny the appeal. A weekend away from the stress of everyday life, to just be with him, to see where this connection could really go. She hesitated for only a moment before typing her response. "That sounds amazing. Let's do it." The reply came almost immediately. "Great. I'll make all the arrangements. I'm looking forward to it." Irene smiled, putting her phone down. A mix of excitement and nerves bubbled up inside her. This was happening. She was actually going away with Ethan. As the days passed, Irene found herself growing more and more eager for the weekend trip. She wanted to know more about Ethan, to understand him better, and to see if the connection between them was as real as it felt. But she also had a sense of unease. She still didn't know everything about him. She knew he was successful, powerful even, but beyond that? What was his past like? What did he want from her? These questions kept swirling in her mind, but she couldn't bring herself to ask. Maybe she was afraid of the answers. Maybe she was afraid of what it would mean if things didn't work out. But when the weekend finally arrived, all those doubts seemed to disappear as she stepped into the sleek car that Ethan had arranged to pick her up. The drive was smooth, and as they made their way upstate, the landscape outside her window seemed to soften, the stress of the city fading with every passing mile. The air grew fresher, the skies clearer, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Irene felt a sense of peace. Ethan was beside her, talking casually about the place they were heading to. It was a small, private cabin in the woods, far away from the distractions of their daily lives. The perfect place to relax and unwind. "I thought we could take a hike tomorrow," Ethan said, his voice calm and easy. "The area around the cabin is beautiful. Just a little nature and some fresh air." Irene nodded, smiling. "That sounds nice." They arrived at the cabin just as the sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow over the landscape. The cabin itself was rustic but elegant, with large windows that offered stunning views of the surrounding forest. Ethan took her bags and led her inside, showing her the cozy living room with a roaring fireplace and the spacious kitchen. "Make yourself at home," he said, setting her bags down. "I'm going to get the fire going. We can relax tonight, maybe cook something together." Irene felt a flutter in her chest. There was something so inviting about this place, something so peaceful. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt so at ease. As the night wore on, they cooked dinner together, laughing and talking about everything and nothing. The weight of their everyday lives seemed to fade away as they shared stories, their connection deepening in ways that neither of them had expected. After dinner, they sat by the fire, the soft crackling of the wood filling the silence. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on the flames. Irene watched him for a moment before speaking. "Ethan," she began, her voice soft. "I have to ask, why me?" Ethan turned his head, his eyes meeting hers. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice gentle. "Why me?" Irene repeated. "Why have you been so kind to me? You barely know me. I'm just a regular person. Someone trying to get by. And you've gone out of your way to help me, to be there for me. Why?" Ethan was silent for a moment, and for the first time, Irene saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. But then he smiled, a warm, genuine smile that seemed to light up the entire room. "I think you're selling yourself short, Irene," he said softly. "You're more than just a regular person. You're someone who makes the world better just by being in it. You have a kindness in you that's rare, and that's something I've always admired." Irene felt her heart skip a beat. She hadn't expected that answer. "But you didn't need to help me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You didn't have to do any of this." Ethan leaned forward, his gaze steady and sincere. "I wanted to," he said simply. "And I still do. I've been in a lot of relationships, Irene. And I've learned that the people who are worth investing in are the ones who don't just take, but give. And you give. You've given me something I didn't even know I needed." Irene felt a rush of emotion, her throat tightening. She didn't know how to respond to that. She had never thought of herself as someone who could give that much to someone else. But maybe, just maybe, Ethan was right. Maybe this was the beginning of something real, something that could change both of their lives. As the night wore on, they sat there in silence, the only sound the crackling of the fire and the soft rustling of the trees outside. And for the first time in a long time, Irene felt truly at peace, knowing that maybe, just maybe, she could finally let someone in. Irene woke up the next morning to the sound of birds chirping outside the cabin. The sunlight filtered through the large windows, casting soft rays across the room. She stretched lazily, feeling a sense of peace that had eluded her for so long. The night before, she and Ethan had spent hours talking by the fire, sharing stories, laughing, and finding common ground. It had been so natural, so easy. She hadn't expected to feel so comfortable with him, but somehow, it just clicked. As she sat up in bed, she could hear Ethan moving around in the kitchen. The scent of fresh coffee and something sweet filled the air, making her stomach rumble with hunger. She smiled to herself, appreciating the small, thoughtful gesture. Ethan always seemed to know just what to do to make her feel cared for. She got out of bed and walked to the kitchen, where Ethan was preparing breakfast. He looked up when she entered, his eyes lighting up as he saw her. "Good morning," he said, his voice warm and genuine. "I made pancakes. Thought we could have a nice, relaxed breakfast before we head out for that hike I promised you." Irene smiled, her heart swelling with affection. "You really know how to spoil me, don't you?" she teased, taking a seat at the table. Ethan chuckled, setting a plate of pancakes in front of her. "Only because you deserve it." They ate together, chatting about their plans for the day. Irene was excited about the hike. She loved nature, the peace it brought, and the chance to escape from the chaos of everyday life. As they finished breakfast, they grabbed their jackets and headed out into the crisp morning air. The forest surrounding the cabin was beautiful, with tall trees, winding paths, and the sound of leaves crunching beneath their boots. They walked side by side, enjoying the quiet and the fresh air. As they made their way deeper into the woods, Irene felt a sense of calm settle over her. This was exactly what she needed, a break from the stress of work, from the endless responsibilities that seemed to pile up every day. For a moment, she could just be herself, without the weight of the world on her shoulders. Ethan walked a few steps ahead, his back to her. Irene couldn't help but watch him for a moment, admiring the way he moved with such confidence and ease. He was a man who knew what he wanted, who had everything under control. But there was still something about him that seemed different. Something real. She caught up to him, and he turned with a smile. "Everything okay?" he asked. Irene nodded, feeling a sudden wave of emotion. "Yeah, I'm really glad we're here," she said softly. "I needed this more than I realized." Ethan's expression softened, and he reached out to take her hand in his. "I'm glad you're enjoying it," he said quietly. "I wanted this to be a good time for both of us. No distractions, just us." Irene squeezed his hand, feeling a sense of warmth spread through her chest. She hadn't realized how much she needed someone like Ethan in her life. Someone who cared, who didn't expect anything in return. It was rare, so rare, and she wasn't sure if she was ready to fully open up to it yet. But she was willing to try. As they continued their hike, the silence between them was comfortable, peaceful. They reached a clearing with a beautiful view of the valley below, and they both stopped to take it in. Irene felt a sense of awe as she gazed out at the breathtaking landscape. It was moments like this that reminded her how small her daily worries really were. Ethan stepped closer to her, and for a moment, they stood side by side, taking in the view together. "It's beautiful," Irene said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It really is," Ethan replied, his gaze still fixed on the scenery. He turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "I've been thinking about what you said last night," he said. "About how hard it is to trust people. I get it. I really do." Irene met his eyes, unsure of what he meant. "What do you mean?" "I've spent so much of my life building this empire, creating this version of myself that everyone thinks they know," he said, his voice quiet. "But it's not always easy to be the person everyone expects you to be. Sometimes, I wonder if people really see me, or if they only see what I've built." Irene's heart ached for him. She had never thought about it like that. She had always admired Ethan's success, but now she could see how much it weighed on him. "Do you ever get tired of it?" she asked softly. Ethan looked away for a moment, his expression distant. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But I don't know how to stop. It's who I am. But I want something more, Irene. I want to build something real with someone who understands me, someone who doesn't just see the money or the power." Irene felt a lump form in her throat. She hadn't expected him to open up like this, to share his doubts and fears with her. It made her see him in a whole new light. "Ethan," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "I'm not sure I'm the right person for you. I don't have what you have. I'm just me." Ethan turned to face her, his expression serious but gentle. "I don't want what I have, Irene," he said, his voice steady. "I want you. The real you." Irene felt her heart skip a beat. She wasn't sure what to say, but in that moment, she realized something. Ethan wasn't just after her kindness or her vulnerability. He was after her, all of her. And maybe, just maybe, she could finally let someone in. As they stood there in the clearing, the weight of their conversation lingering between them, Irene knew that this weekend, this moment, was a turning point. It wasn't just a hike, or a getaway, or a fleeting moment of connection. It was something more. Something that could change everything. Irene couldn't help but smile as she and Ethan continued their walk back toward the cabin. The hike had been everything she had hoped for, peaceful, calming, and full of moments that made her feel closer to him. With every step they took, the bond between them felt stronger. As they neared the cabin, she felt a sense of gratitude for this weekend, for the way Ethan had shown her what it felt like to truly live in the moment. But as much as she enjoyed their time together, the questions that had been lingering in her mind continued to surface. Was this connection real? Could she trust him completely? Could she really let go of the walls she had spent so long building? She glanced over at Ethan, who was walking beside her with a relaxed smile, his hands tucked in his jacket pockets. Despite his charm and kindness, there was still a part of Irene that wondered if she was making a mistake. She had seen too many people in her life, people with their own agendas, their own hidden motives. Ethan wasn't like anyone she had met before, but could she really trust that he was being genuine? As they reached the cabin, Ethan stopped and turned to her, his expression serious but kind. "Irene," he said softly, "I've been thinking." She raised an eyebrow. "About what?" "About us," he said, his voice low. "About what this means." Irene's heart skipped a beat. She had been wondering the same thing. "I think we're both on the same page," she said, trying to sound confident, though her mind was still full of questions. Ethan took a step closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "I want to be honest with you, Irene," he said. "I'm not sure where this is going, but I know I want to see where it leads." Irene's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected him to say that, but in a way, it felt like a relief. "I feel the same way," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm willing to take a chance." Ethan smiled, and it was a smile that made Irene's heart melt. "I'm glad to hear that," he said. "Because I don't want you to think that I'm rushing you or pushing you into anything. I just want you to know that I care about you, and I want to be there for you." Irene nodded, feeling a lump form in her throat. She had never had someone be so honest with her, so willing to be vulnerable. It felt like a breath of fresh air, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she could trust someone again. "I care about you too, Ethan," she said, her voice shaking just a little. "I don't know what the future holds, but I want to figure it out with you." They stood there in the quiet of the woods, the only sounds the rustling of the trees and the distant calls of birds. For a moment, everything felt still, as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for them to take the next step. Ethan reached for her hand, his fingers gently wrapping around hers. "We'll take it one day at a time," he said softly. "No pressure. Just us." Irene smiled, feeling the warmth of his hand in hers. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. As they made their way back inside the cabin, Irene felt a sense of calm settle over her. She wasn't sure what the future held, but in that moment, with Ethan by her side, she felt like anything was possible. Later that evening, as they sat on the couch by the fire, Irene couldn't help but reflect on everything that had happened so far. She had come to this cabin unsure of what to expect, unsure of where things were headed with Ethan. But now, after a day of talking, laughing, and sharing in a way she hadn't done with anyone in years, she realized something: she was ready to take a leap. Ready to open herself up to the possibility of something real, something lasting. Ethan leaned over, gently pulling her into a soft embrace, and Irene relaxed into his arms. It felt natural, like it was the most comfortable thing in the world. And as they sat there together, the fire crackling softly in the background, Irene knew that this was only the beginning. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever doubts she still had, she felt a sense of peace that she hadn't known in a long time. With Ethan by her side, she was ready to face whatever came next. They had taken the first step, and for the first time in a long time, Irene felt hopeful about the future. The night stretched on, filled with quiet conversations and the kind of silence that spoke volumes. As the fire began to die down, they both stood, hand in hand, and made their way to the window. The stars were out in full force, shining brightly against the dark sky. Irene looked up at them, feeling a sense of wonder. For once, she didn't feel like she was just drifting through life. She was here, present in the moment, and she had someone beside her who truly saw her. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but one thing was certain: she was no longer afraid to find out. Irene awoke the next morning to the soft glow of sunlight streaming through the window, filling the room with warmth. She stretched, feeling the familiar weight of the blanket around her, and for a moment, she just let herself bask in the peace of the moment. The events of the past few days had left her with a sense of calm she hadn't felt in a long time. She was here, in a beautiful cabin, with someone who truly cared about her. It felt surreal. As she turned to look at Ethan, who was still fast asleep beside her, she couldn't help but smile. He looked so peaceful, his face relaxed in sleep, a stark contrast to the busy, driven persona she had seen in him. The night before, they had stayed up late talking, sharing their fears, hopes, and everything in between. It had been the most open and honest conversation she'd had in years, and she had never felt so connected to another person. Irene quietly got out of bed, careful not to wake him, and made her way to the small kitchen area. The smell of fresh coffee drifted through the air, and she took a deep breath, feeling a sense of contentment settle over her. She was starting to realize just how much this weekend had changed her, how much Ethan had changed her. As she poured herself a cup of coffee, she found herself thinking about what had brought her here. All her life, she had built walls around herself, never allowing anyone to truly get close. She had seen relationships come and go, and each time, she had been left with the same feeling, emptiness. But with Ethan, it was different. He had been patient, kind, and most of all, real. He hadn't tried to impress her with his wealth or success, instead, he had shown her that he was just as human as she was. That was what had drawn her in. Ethan wasn't just someone who could offer her a life of luxury, he was someone who understood her, who saw her for who she really was. And for the first time, Irene felt like she could truly open up. As she sipped her coffee, she glanced back at the bedroom. Ethan was stirring, waking up with a slow stretch before his eyes fluttered open. His gaze locked onto hers, and a warm smile spread across his face. "Good morning," he said, his voice husky with sleep. "Good morning," Irene replied, her heart racing slightly at the way he looked at her. It was as if he could see straight into her soul. Ethan sat up, rubbing his eyes. "I made breakfast," he said, his voice cheerful. "Pancakes and eggs. I thought we could start the day right." Irene couldn't help but laugh. "You really know how to spoil a girl." Ethan grinned. "Only the best for you." As they sat down to breakfast, the conversation turned to lighter topics, what they had planned for the rest of the day, the things they both loved about nature, their shared desire to explore new places. The easy banter between them felt natural, and Irene found herself relaxing even more in Ethan's company. As they finished their meal, Ethan stood up, stretching his arms. "How about a walk down by the lake?" he suggested. Irene smiled, nodding. "That sounds perfect." They headed outside, the cool morning air refreshing against their skin. The lake was a short walk away, and as they reached it, they stood for a moment, taking in the view. The water was still, reflecting the trees and the clear blue sky above. It was beautiful, serene. Ethan turned to Irene, his expression serious now. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said last night," he began. Irene looked at him, her curiosity piqued. "What about?" "About trust," he said softly. "And about what comes next." Irene felt her heart rate quicken. She had been wondering the same thing. What came next? Was this just a fleeting connection, a weekend escape, or was there something more? "I know I'm moving fast," Ethan continued, his voice gentle. "But I can't help the way I feel, Irene. I've never felt this way about anyone before." Irene's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't sure what to say. She had felt the same thing, but she was afraid. Afraid of trusting too quickly, afraid of getting hurt. "I'm not asking for anything, Irene," Ethan said, as if reading her thoughts. "I just want to be honest with you. I like you. A lot. And I want to see where this goes. But only if you feel the same way." Irene looked at him, her heart swelling. She hadn't realized just how much she had been holding back until now. "I feel the same way," she said softly, her voice shaking slightly. "I've never felt like this before." Ethan smiled, his eyes lighting up. "So, what do we do now?" Irene took a deep breath, feeling a sense of calm wash over her. "We take it one step at a time," she said, her voice steady. "We see where this leads." Ethan reached for her hand, his fingers gently wrapping around hers. "I think that sounds perfect." They stood there for a moment, just holding hands, taking in the beauty of the lake and the quiet of the morning. It felt like the world had slowed down, just for them. Irene had never imagined she would be standing in a place like this, with someone like Ethan, feeling so open, so vulnerable. But somehow, with him, it didn't feel scary. It felt right. "You know," Ethan said, breaking the silence, "I'm really glad you came here with me." Irene turned to face him, a soft smile on her lips. "Me too," she said, her heart full. "I think this is just the beginning." And for the first time in a long time, Irene felt a sense of hope. Hope for something real. Something lasting. With Ethan by her side, she was ready to take that next step, wherever it led. Irene and Ethan returned to the cabin after their walk by the lake, both feeling a sense of peace that had eluded them for so long. The weight of the conversation they had shared by the water still lingered in the air, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of weight that came from vulnerability and honesty, the kind that brought people closer together. As they stepped inside, the cozy warmth of the cabin enveloped them. And Irene felt a sense of contentment she hadn't felt in a long time. Ethan looked over at her, his expression soft. "So, what's next?" he asked, his voice casual but carrying an underlying curiosity. Irene paused for a moment, taking in the quiet of the room. The crackling of the fire in the hearth, the soft hum of the world outside, it all felt so still, so right. "I think we keep doing what we're doing," she said, turning to him with a smile. "Taking things one step at a time." Ethan nodded, a warm smile tugging at his lips. "I like that," he said, stepping closer. "No pressure, just us, enjoying each moment as it comes." Irene felt her heart swell. She hadn't known what she was expecting when she came to this cabin, but this was more than she had ever hoped for. There was something about Ethan that made her feel safe, like she could finally let go of the walls she had spent years building around herself. They spent the rest of the day in a comfortable silence, enjoying the simple things, reading, cooking dinner together, and sharing quiet moments by the fire. It felt easy, like they had known each other for far longer than they really had. As the evening wore on, Irene found herself more and more at ease in Ethan's presence, her doubts slowly melting away. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. As the night deepened, they sat together on the couch, the flickering light of the fire casting soft shadows across the room. Ethan reached for her hand, his fingers lightly brushing against hers. "I know we've only just started this journey, Irene," he said, his voice quiet, almost hesitant. "But I want you to know that I'm serious about this. About us." Irene looked up at him, her heart skipping a beat at the sincerity in his eyes. "I'm serious too, Ethan," she said softly. "I know we're taking things slow, but I'm willing to see where this goes. I'm ready to open up to the possibility of something real." Ethan smiled, his thumb gently caressing the back of her hand. "I'm glad to hear that," he said, his voice steady. "Because I think we have something special here. Something worth exploring." Irene's pulse quickened as she looked at him. She hadn't expected to feel this way, so deeply connected to someone, so ready to trust again. But with Ethan, everything felt different. She wasn't just falling for him, she was falling into something that felt like it could last. "So, what do we do now?" she asked, her voice soft with anticipation. Ethan looked at her, a playful glint in his eyes. "Now? Now we keep enjoying this moment," he said. "No rush, no expectations, just us." Irene smiled, feeling the warmth of his words settle in her chest. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't thinking about the future, about the uncertainties that always loomed over her. She was here, in this moment, with someone who made her feel seen and valued. And that was enough. The night stretched on, and they continued to talk, to laugh, to share their hopes and dreams, as if they had all the time in the world. Irene didn't know what the future held, but she was no longer afraid to find out. With Ethan by her side, she felt like anything was possible. As the evening came to a close, Ethan stood and stretched, looking over at Irene with a smile. "It's getting late," he said, his voice gentle. "But I'm glad we've had this time together." Irene nodded, her heart full. "Me too," she said softly. "It's been perfect." Ethan held out his hand, and Irene took it without hesitation. As they made their way to the bedroom, she couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude. This weekend, this connection with Ethan had opened up something inside her that she hadn't even realized was closed. And now, for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. As they lay down beside each other, Irene let out a contented sigh, closing her eyes and letting the quiet of the cabin wash over her. Ethan's presence beside her felt like a promise of something more, something worth fighting for. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Irene allowed herself to believe in that possibility. In the quiet darkness of the cabin, the world outside faded away, and for a brief moment, all that mattered was the person beside her and the future they might build together. Irene woke up the next morning feeling like a different person. The cabin was still quiet, the early sunlight filtering through the windows, casting a soft glow over the room. She stretched, feeling the warmth of the bed and the comfort of being in this serene place. Ethan was still asleep beside her, his face relaxed in sleep, and for a moment, Irene simply watched him, the rise and fall of his chest steady and calm. It felt like the world outside didn't exist, like time had slowed down to give them this perfect moment together. As she lay there, the weight of the past few days settled in her mind. Their conversations, their shared moments, had brought them closer than Irene had expected. She had never believed in love at first sight, but this connection with Ethan was different. It wasn't about the instant spark or the romantic fantasy, it was about something deeper, something that felt real. But even as she felt a sense of peace and contentment, there was a part of her that wondered if this was too good to be true. She had been hurt before, and the idea of giving herself completely to someone else still felt like a risk she wasn't sure she was ready to take. Ethan stirred beside her, his eyes opening slowly. He turned to face her, a soft smile spreading across his face when he saw her awake. "Good morning," he said, his voice husky with sleep. Irene smiled back, her heart fluttering at the way he looked at her. "Good morning," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan stretched, his hand reaching out to touch hers. "Sleep well?" he asked. Irene nodded, feeling the warmth of his hand in hers. "Yeah, I did. It's been a long time since I've had a night like that." Ethan smiled, his thumb brushing lightly across her knuckles. "I'm glad to hear that," he said softly. "It's been a long time for me, too." There was a pause as they both looked at each other, the weight of their words hanging in the air. "I'm glad we're here together," Irene said, her voice sincere. Ethan's eyes softened, and he nodded. "Me too," he said. "I don't think I've ever felt this comfortable with someone before. It feels right, you know." Irene smiled, her heart swelling at his words. "I know exactly what you mean." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, simply enjoying the quiet and the presence of one another. For Irene, it felt like this was the first time in a long time that she wasn't rushing toward something, that she could just be in the moment. Ethan leaned in closer, his voice suddenly serious. "I know we're taking things slow," he said, "but I need to be honest with you, Irene." Irene's stomach fluttered slightly at his tone. "What is it?" she asked, her heart racing. Ethan took a deep breath, his gaze fixed on hers. "I care about you," he said softly. "I really do. I don't want to rush anything, but I can't help how I feel. I'm falling for you, Irene." Irene's breath caught in her throat. She had known there was something between them, but hearing him say it out loud made her heart skip a beat. She wasn't sure what to say. I care about you, too," she said after a moment, her voice quiet but genuine. She trailed off, unsure of how to express the hesitation she still felt. Ethan nodded, as if he understood exactly what she was thinking. "I know," he said gently. "I don't want to rush you. I just want you to know that I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. Whatever happens, I want to be with you, Irene." Irene looked into his eyes, feeling the sincerity in his words. It was rare to find someone who spoke from the heart, someone who was willing to be vulnerable without expecting anything in return. She had spent so much of her life guarding herself, afraid of getting hurt, but with Ethan, it felt different. She didn't feel like she had to protect herself anymore. Slowly, she nodded. I'm willing to see where this goes, Ethan, she said softly. I'm willing to take a chance on us. Ethan's face lit up, a genuine smile spreading across his features. That's all I can ask for, he said, his voice full of warmth. He leaned in, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. I'm glad we're on the same page. Irene closed her eyes, letting herself relax into the moment. She had no idea what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of it. Whatever came next, she knew they would face it together. The rest of the day was spent in a comfortable haze of togetherness. They made breakfast together, went for another walk by the lake, and spent time simply enjoying each other's company. With every passing hour, Irene felt herself letting go of the fears that had held her back for so long. She was no longer looking over her shoulder, wondering when the other shoe would drop. She was here, in this moment, and that was enough. As evening fell and they sat by the fire once again, Irene couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. Ethan was beside her, his presence a comforting constant in the quiet of the cabin. She leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling a deep sense of contentment. This weekend has been perfect, she said softly, her voice filled with gratitude. Ethan kissed the top of her head. I'm glad you think so, he said. I feel the same way. Irene smiled, closing her eyes for a moment, letting the warmth of the fire and the softness of Ethan's touch wash over her. She had found something she hadn't even realized she was looking for, a connection that felt real, that felt lasting. And for the first time in a long time, she was ready to believe in the possibility of love, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. Irene woke up the next morning with a sense of calm she hadn't felt in years. The past few days with Ethan had been like a dream, a peaceful escape from the chaos of everyday life. She stretched in bed, the soft light from the window gently nudging her awake, and turned to look at Ethan, who was still sound asleep beside her. She smiled to herself, feeling a quiet happiness settle deep in her chest. Ethan had become more than just someone she was spending time with, he had become someone she genuinely cared for. And for the first time, she wasn't scared to admit it. The walls she had built around herself over the years, the ones that kept others at arm's length, were slowly crumbling. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew she was ready to face it with Ethan by her side. As the morning wore on, they enjoyed a slow breakfast together. There was no rush, no agenda, just the two of them sharing moments of quiet companionship. It felt effortless, as though they had been doing this forever. After breakfast, they decided to go for a walk, once again taking in the beauty of the surroundings. The cabin was nestled in a secluded part of the woods, and the air felt fresh and untainted by the pressures of the outside world. Irene couldn't help but feel grateful for this time, for the space to think, to reflect, and to truly connect with Ethan. As they walked hand in hand, Ethan looked over at her, his expression soft but serious. I've been thinking about something, he said, his voice steady. Irene turned to him, curious. What's that? About us, Ethan said. About what we've talked about over the past few days. Irene felt her heart race. She had known they would eventually have to address what was between them, the connection that had grown so naturally. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. What about us? She asked, her voice calm but with a hint of uncertainty. Ethan stopped walking and turned to face her. I want you to know that I'm serious about this, he said, his eyes locking with hers. I don't want to rush anything, but I care about you, Irene. I care about you more than I've cared about anyone in a long time. Irene's breath caught in her throat. She had heard those words before, from people who didn't really mean them, from people who said what they thought she wanted to hear. But when Ethan said it, it felt different. It felt real. I care about you too, Ethan, she said softly, her voice trembling just slightly. But I need to know that this is real. That it's not just a passing moment. Ethan reached out and gently cupped her face in his hands, his touch tender and reassuring. I promise you, Irene, this is real, he said, his voice low and steady. I know we've only known each other for a short time, but I've never felt this way about anyone before. And I'm not going anywhere. I want to see where this can go, with you. Irene's heart skipped a beat. She had never been one to rush into anything, and yet, with Ethan, she felt like she could trust him. The fear that had always held her back seemed to dissolve in his presence. "I want that too," she said quietly. "I want to see where this leads." Ethan smiled, his eyes lighting up with relief and happiness. "Then let's take it one day at a time," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "No expectations, just us, seeing where this journey takes us." Irene smiled back, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. She didn't have to have everything figured out. She just needed to trust the process and take things as they came. The rest of the day was spent in a beautiful, easy rhythm. They explored the area around the cabin, laughing and talking as they wandered through the trees. It felt natural, like they had been doing this forever. Irene realized, as they walked side by side, that she wasn't looking for grand gestures or big moments. She was looking for connection, for someone who saw her, who valued her, and who was willing to be open and honest with her. And that was exactly what Ethan was offering. As the day came to a close, they returned to the cabin, both feeling content and at ease. Irene sat down on the couch, leaning back and letting out a long sigh. Ethan sat beside her, his hand finding hers once more. "I'm glad we're doing this," he said softly, looking at her with a gentle smile. "Me too," Irene replied, squeezing his hand. For the first time in a long time, Irene felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. She wasn't holding back anymore. She wasn't afraid to be vulnerable, to open herself up to the possibility of something real. She was ready. "I think this is the start of something amazing," she said, her voice filled with quiet hope. Ethan nodded, his eyes filled with affection. "I think so too," he said. As they sat there together, their fingers intertwined, Irene realized that she wasn't just falling for him, she was falling into something deeper, something that felt like it had the potential to change her life in ways she hadn't imagined. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid of it. With Ethan by her side, she felt ready to face whatever came next. Irene woke up the next morning to the soft sound of rain tapping gently against the windows. It was a cozy sound, comforting in its own way. She stretched and glanced over at Ethan, who was still asleep beside her. His face was relaxed, peaceful, and for a moment, Irene just watched him, taking in the quiet of the morning. It was hard to believe how much had changed in such a short time. The doubt she had held onto for so long, the fear of letting someone in, seemed to have faded away. With Ethan, everything felt different. There was a security in his presence, an authenticity that made her feel like she could finally be herself, without the walls she had built around her. It had been a long time since she had allowed herself to feel this way, and she was surprised by how easily it was happening. She quietly got out of bed, trying not to disturb him, and went to the kitchen to make herself a cup of coffee. As she waited for the kettle to boil, she found herself thinking about the future. About what came next. She didn't know where this relationship would go, but she knew one thing, she was ready to find out. As the steam rose from her cup, she heard the sound of footsteps behind her. Ethan had woken up and was standing in the doorway, a smile on his face. "Morning," he said, his voice still heavy with sleep. Irene smiled back, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "Morning," she replied softly. Ethan stepped closer, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "How'd you sleep?" he asked, his voice low and comforting. "I slept great," she said, leaning back into his embrace. "I think the sound of the rain helped." "I'm glad," he said, kissing the top of her head. They stood there for a moment, simply enjoying the quiet of the morning. Irene felt a sense of peace settle over her, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. She wasn't worried about the future, not in the same way she had been before. With Ethan, she felt like she could let go of the fears that had held her back for so long. "What do you think about heading into town today?" Ethan asked, breaking the silence. "We could grab lunch, explore a bit. It's not far from here, and we could use a change of scenery." Irene nodded, smiling. "That sounds perfect. I'd love to get out of here for a bit." They spent the rest of the morning getting ready, enjoying the simple, easy rhythm of the day. As they drove into town, the rain stopped, and the clouds parted, revealing a bright blue sky. The town was small, quaint, with cobblestone streets and little shops lining the main square. It was the kind of place that felt timeless, like it had been frozen in time, untouched by the chaos of the outside world. They walked around, stopping at a small cafe for lunch, where they talked about everything and nothing. They shared their favorite memories, their dreams, and even their fears. Irene was surprised by how open she felt with him. She hadn't expected to be so comfortable, so willing to share so much of herself, but with Ethan it felt natural. After lunch, they wandered through the town, exploring the local shops and enjoying the quiet beauty of the place. As the afternoon wore on, they found a small park with a fountain, and they sat down on a bench, simply watching the world go by. Ethan turned to Irene, his expression soft. "I'm really glad we did this," he said, his voice quiet. "I'm glad we're doing this. Being together. I don't know how to explain it, but I feel like I've known you forever, Irene. It's easy with you. It feels like we're meant to be here, right now, together." Irene looked at him, her heart swelling. She hadn't realized until that moment just how much she had been craving this kind of connection. Ethan wasn't just someone she was getting to know, he was someone who had brought out the best in her, someone who had made her feel safe enough to open up. "I feel the same way," she said softly. "It's easy with you too. I'm not sure what the future holds, but I know that I want to find out with you." Ethan smiled, his hand gently brushing against hers. "We'll take it one step at a time," he said, his voice full of certainty. "No pressure. Just us." Irene smiled back, feeling the warmth of his words. It felt right. Everything about this felt right. The connection, the ease, the way they understood each other without needing to say much. She knew they were still in the early stages of this relationship, but for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid. She was ready to take the next step, whatever that may be. As the sun began to set, they walked back to the car, hand in hand, both feeling a sense of contentment that came from simply being in each other's presence. They didn't need to say anything more, the quiet spoke volumes. As they drove back to the cabin, the sky turned a deep shade of orange, and Irene looked out the window, feeling a sense of peace settle over her. She wasn't sure where this journey with Ethan would take her, but she knew one thing for sure, she was ready for whatever came next. With him by her side, she felt like anything was possible. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was finally on the right path. Irene and Ethan spent the next few days at the cabin, enjoying the slow pace and simplicity of life away from the hustle and bustle of their daily routines. They woke up every morning to the sound of birds singing outside the window, the warmth of the sunlight creeping into the room, and the comforting presence of one another. It was easy. Too easy, Irene thought sometimes, but in the best possible way. They spent their days hiking, reading, cooking meals together, and simply enjoying the peace that came from being in each other's company. The doubts that had lingered in Irene's mind at the beginning, about whether this connection was too good to be true, whether she was rushing into something she wasn't ready for, had gradually faded. The more time she spent with Ethan, the more she realized that what they had was real. It wasn't just about the fleeting moments of romance or the idea of something perfect. It was about being with someone who saw her, truly saw her, and who cared about her without asking for anything in return. It felt like she was finally allowing herself to breathe again. Ethan, for his part, seemed to feel the same way. He was kind, patient, and gave her the space to be herself without pushing for anything more than she was ready to give. There were no expectations, no pressure. They simply existed together, sharing moments and building something that felt grounded and true. One afternoon, after a long hike through the woods, they found themselves sitting by the lake, their feet dipping into the cool water as they watched the sunset. The sky was a vibrant mix of oranges and pinks, reflecting off the water's surface like a painting. Irene leaned her head against Ethan's shoulder, feeling a sense of contentment she hadn't realized she was craving. "You know," Ethan said softly, breaking the silence, "I've been thinking a lot about this time we've spent here." Irene tilted her head to look up at him, her heart skipping a beat at the earnestness in his voice. "What about it?" she asked, her voice quiet but filled with curiosity. Ethan turned his head to meet her gaze, his eyes serious yet filled with warmth. "I'm not going to rush things, I promise. But I feel like I need to say it." He paused, taking a deep breath. "I'm falling for you, Irene. I know we've only known each other for a short time, but I can't help how I feel." Irene's heart fluttered in her chest at his words. She had known, of course, that there was something growing between them. But hearing him say it out loud made her chest tighten with emotion. It was everything she had wanted to hear, yet it still took her by surprise. She swallowed hard, unsure of how to respond at first. "Ethan," she began softly, her voice steady despite the rush of feelings inside her, "I think I've been falling for you too. I just didn't know how to say it." She paused, taking a moment to gather her thoughts. "This is all new for me, but it feels right. I'm not sure what the future holds, but I'm ready to take the next step with you." Ethan smiled, his eyes softening as he reached out to gently take her hand. "I'm glad to hear that," he said, his voice low and full of affection. "I'm not asking for anything right now, Irene. I just want to be with you. No pressure, just us, figuring this out together." Irene nodded, her fingers tightening around his in response. "I can do that," she said, her voice steady. "I think we're already doing it." They sat in companionable silence for a few moments, the sounds of the evening filling the air, the rustling of leaves in the wind, the occasional chirp of birds, and the gentle lapping of the water against the shore. It felt peaceful, like the world was simply letting them be. After a while, they stood up and made their way back to the cabin, their hands still intertwined. The evening passed with more quiet conversation, a simple meal, and a lingering sense of connection between them. As Irene lay in bed that night, her thoughts wandered back to their conversation by the lake. She had always been cautious, afraid of giving too much of herself to someone else, but with Ethan, she felt something different. She felt safe. She felt seen. She felt like she could let go of the past, the walls she had built, and trust in something real. She had no idea what the future held, but with Ethan by her side, she knew she was ready to face it. The next morning, as the sun rose higher in the sky, they packed their bags and prepared to leave the cabin, but neither of them felt a sense of sadness. It wasn't the cabin or the quiet retreat that had made this time so special, it was the connection they had built. The bond between them had grown stronger in those few days, and it was something they both knew was worth nurturing. As they drove back to the city, the conversations continued, easy and natural. They didn't need to say much to understand each other. The silence was comfortable, and the laughter that came between words was enough. When they arrived at the city, Irene looked over at Ethan, her heart still full from the weekend. "This is just the beginning, isn't it?" she said softly, her voice full of quiet hope. Ethan smiled, his eyes meeting hers. "Yes, it is," he replied. "And I'm looking forward to every moment of it." With that, Irene knew that no matter what happened next, they were ready. Together. Irene and Ethan returned to their daily lives after the weekend, but something had shifted. The connection they had built in those few short days felt stronger than anything they had experienced before. For the first time in years, Irene felt like she was truly living, not just going through the motions of everyday life. The moments of clarity she had found with Ethan in the quiet of the cabin had stayed with her, and she found herself reflecting on them often. They had spent the last few weeks getting to know each other even better, and it was clear that their relationship was growing in a way neither of them had anticipated. There were still uncertainties, of course. Irene had a tendency to second-guess herself, to worry about the future, and sometimes, doubts crept in. But Ethan had a way of making everything feel simple, uncomplicated. He never pressured her to move faster than she was comfortable with. He was patient, understanding, and he made her feel safe. It was the kind of reassurance Irene hadn't known she needed, but now, she couldn't imagine her life without it. One evening, a few weeks after their time at the cabin, Irene found herself sitting on the couch in her apartment, scrolling through her phone. The day had been busy, and she was grateful for the quiet moment to relax. Her thoughts drifted to Ethan, as they often did, and she smiled to herself, thinking about how far they had come in such a short time. As if on cue, her phone buzzed with a text message from him. "Hey, are you free tonight? I was thinking we could grab dinner and maybe catch a movie." Irene's heart skipped a beat. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt this excited to see someone. She quickly typed a reply. "That sounds perfect. I'd love to." She hit send and set her phone down, feeling a mix of excitement and nervous energy. She had always been cautious, afraid of giving too much of herself to someone, but with Ethan, it felt different. She had been able to open up to him in ways she never thought possible, and now, she was looking forward to what the future held for them. Ethan picked her up that evening, as they had planned, and they drove to a cozy restaurant that Irene had always wanted to try. The moment they walked in, the warmth and inviting atmosphere made Irene feel like everything was right in the world. They were led to a small table by the window, and as they sat down, Irene couldn't help but notice how comfortable everything felt. It wasn't just the ambience or the food, it was the ease of being with Ethan. They didn't need to fill the silence with small talk, just being in each other's company was enough. Dinner was filled with laughter, easy conversation, and the kind of connection that only seemed to grow stronger the more they shared. As they finished their meal, Ethan leaned back in his chair, looking at her with a thoughtful expression. "I've been thinking," he said quietly. Irene looked at him, her curiosity piqued. "What about?" "About us," Ethan said, his voice steady. "About where we're headed. I know we've both been taking this slow, and I respect that. But I also want you to know that I'm serious about you, Irene. I want to see where this goes, and I'm willing to put in the effort. I just want to be sure we're on the same page." Irene's heart swelled in her chest. She had known that Ethan was serious, but hearing him say it out loud made her realize just how much she had come to care about him. "I feel the same way," she said softly, her voice filled with sincerity. "I've been thinking about it too. And I'm ready to take the next step, with you." Ethan smiled, his eyes lighting up. "I'm glad to hear that," he said. "Because I really believe in us, Irene. I know we've both had our share of doubts in the past, but I think we've built something real here. And I'm excited about what comes next." Irene smiled, feeling a sense of warmth spread through her. For so long, she had been afraid to let someone in, to trust fully. But with Ethan, everything felt different. He was steady, grounded, and he made her feel like she wasn't alone. She wasn't sure what the future would hold, but in that moment, she knew she was ready to face it with him by her side. After dinner, they walked to the nearby movie theater, hand in hand, both excited for a quiet evening together. As they sat in the darkened theater, sharing popcorn and laughing at the funny scenes, Irene couldn't help but feel that sense of peace she had come to know in Ethan's presence. It was simple, but it was everything she needed. They didn't have to try to be anything they weren't, they could just be themselves. The night ended with a slow walk back to her apartment, the cool evening air a welcome contrast to the warmth they had shared inside the theater. As they reached the front door, Ethan turned to her. His expression soft. "I'm really glad we did this," he said, his voice low. Irene smiled, feeling the same sense of contentment. "Me too," she replied. "It's been perfect." Ethan leaned in, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. "Good night, Irene," he said, his voice gentle. "I'll see you soon." Irene smiled, feeling a sense of gratitude fill her chest. "Good night, Ethan," she said, watching him walk away with a heart full of hope. As she stepped inside, she knew that whatever came next, she was ready for it. She wasn't afraid anymore. She was living, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she had found the person she was meant to be with. Irene woke up the next morning feeling a sense of peace that she hadn't known in years. The night before had been perfect, an evening spent with Ethan, enjoying each other's company and sharing in the quiet understanding that seemed to be growing between them. She stretched and rolled over, her gaze drifting to the empty side of the bed where Ethan had been just a few hours earlier. It had been a while since she had felt this comfortable with someone, this ready to face whatever life had in store. She smiled to herself, knowing that this was more than just a passing fling. She was building something real with Ethan. The sound of her phone buzzing on the nightstand interrupted her thoughts. Reaching over, she grabbed it, seeing a message from Ethan. "Good morning, beautiful. I was thinking about what you said last night, and I just wanted to remind you that I'm here, no matter what. We're in this together." Irene's heart swelled at his words. She had heard similar sentiments before, but this felt different. This wasn't just a promise, it was an understanding between them, a shared commitment to see where this relationship could go. She quickly typed a response. "I'm here too, Ethan. I'm ready to see what's next for us." She hit send and set the phone down, feeling a warmth spread through her. She wasn't used to this level of openness, this sense of connection that seemed to exist effortlessly between them. It felt like they were on the same wavelength, each of them learning to trust the other more with every passing day. After a quick breakfast, Irene decided to take the day off from work. She and Ethan had made plans for a low-key afternoon in the city, and she wanted to make the most of their time together. As she got ready, she couldn't help but think back to their first meeting, the awkwardness, the uncertainty. She remembered how she had felt when he paid for her coffee at the cafe, and how skeptical she had been. But now, here they were, a few weeks later, and she couldn't imagine her life without him. When Ethan arrived to pick her up, she could see the same easy smile on his face that always made her heart flutter. "Ready for our adventure?" he asked, his voice light with excitement. "Absolutely," Irene replied, grinning. "Lead the way." They spent the afternoon exploring the city, wandering through museums, stopping at little shops, and having lunch at a quaint bistro. The day was filled with laughter and easy conversation, and Irene found herself feeling more and more at ease in Ethan's company. As they walked through the park later in the day, the sun beginning to set, Ethan stopped and turned to her. "I've been thinking," he said, his tone serious but warm. "I know we've talked about taking things slow, and I respect that. But I want you to know, Irene, that I'm not going anywhere. I want to be with you. I'm ready for something real." Irene stopped walking, her heart pounding in her chest. She had known that Ethan was serious about her, but hearing him say it out loud made everything feel more tangible, more real. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "I want that too, Ethan," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've been scared, unsure of where this was going, but now, I'm ready. I want to be with you." Ethan smiled, his eyes softening as he stepped closer to her. He gently cupped her face in his hands. "You don't have to be scared, Irene. I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere." Irene felt a rush of emotion overwhelm her as she gazed into his eyes. For the first time in a long time, she realized that she wasn't afraid anymore. She had been so used to guarding her heart, to keeping her distance from people, but with Ethan, it felt different. He wasn't like the others. He was steady, reliable, and most importantly, he made her feel safe. "I trust you," she whispered. Ethan's smile widened, and he leaned in, pressing his forehead gently against hers. "I trust you too," he said softly. They stood there for a moment, just holding each other, surrounded by the quiet of the park. The world around them seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them, completely in sync. It was a moment that Irene would remember forever, a moment where everything seemed to fall into place. They spent the rest of the evening walking through the city, talking about their hopes and dreams, sharing more pieces of their lives with each other. There was no rush, no pressure. They were just enjoying the simple pleasure of being together, knowing that whatever happened next, they would face it as a team. As they said goodnight later that evening, Ethan kissed her gently on the cheek. "I'm really glad we're doing this," he said, his voice low. "Me too," Irene replied, her heart full. "It's been amazing." As she watched him drive away, Irene stood in the doorway for a moment, letting the cool night air wash over her. She didn't know what the future held, but she was no longer afraid of it. With Ethan by her side, she knew she was ready to face whatever came next. The journey they were on felt just as it should, natural, unforced, and full of promise. And for the first time in a long time, Irene allowed herself to fully believe that love could be just as real and fulfilling as she had always hoped. Irene spent the next few weeks feeling like she was living in a dream. Everything with Ethan seemed to be falling into place perfectly. They spent time together every weekend, exploring new parts of the city, trying new restaurants, and taking long walks through the park. Their bond continued to grow stronger, and Irene found herself looking forward to every moment with him. There was something about Ethan that made her feel alive, as though the world around her was brighter, more vibrant. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt this way, this sure about someone, this open to the possibilities of the future. She had let go of the doubts that had once haunted her, the fear of getting hurt. She trusted Ethan in a way she had never trusted anyone before. One Friday evening, Ethan surprised her with a spontaneous trip to a nearby town. "I thought we could get out of the city for the weekend," he said with a smile as he picked her up. "Just you and me, away from everything." Irene had always loved getting away from the hustle and bustle of everyday life, and the idea of spending an entire weekend with Ethan, exploring somewhere new, felt like the perfect way to deepen their connection. They drove through scenic countryside, the roads lined with tall trees, and the air crisp and fresh. As they arrived at their destination, Irene couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement. The town was small, quaint, and peaceful, with cobblestone streets and charming shops. The hotel they checked into was cozy, with a rustic charm that made it feel like they had stepped into another time. The room had a view of the surrounding mountains, and as Irene looked out the window, she felt a deep sense of gratitude for everything that had brought her here. Over the next 2 days, Irene and Ethan explored the town together. They wandered through art galleries, sipped coffee at a small cafe, and even took a hike through the nearby trails. Every moment felt like it was meant to be. The easy rhythm of their days together, the conversations that never seemed to run out, made Irene realize just how much she had come to care for him. She had never been one for grand gestures, but with Ethan, everything felt significant. As they sat on a bench overlooking the lake, Ethan turned to her, his expression soft. "I've been thinking a lot about us," he said, his voice low but steady. "I know we've been taking things slowly, and I want you to know that I'm not rushing anything. But I'm really happy with where we are, Irene. And I just need you to know that I want this. I want us. For real." Irene's heart skipped a beat. She had known, deep down, that Ethan was serious about her. But hearing him say it aloud made everything feel even more real. She looked at him, her eyes meeting his. "I'm happy too, Ethan," she said softly. "I'm happy with us. I've never felt this way before, but I know I'm ready for what comes next. I want to see where this goes, together." Ethan smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that made Irene's chest tighten with emotion. He reached out and gently took her hand. "You have no idea how much that means to me," he said. "I'm so glad we're on the same page." Irene felt her heart swell with affection as she squeezed his hand. "I think this is just the beginning," she said, her voice filled with quiet hope. Over the next few weeks, their relationship continued to blossom. They spent more time together, and with each passing day, their connection deepened. Irene found herself thinking about the future in a way she hadn't in years. She had always been so focused on the present, on the next task, the next deadline, but with Ethan, she could finally see a future that was full of possibilities. There were still moments of uncertainty, of course. They both had their own lives, their own careers, and they didn't want to rush into anything. But what they had was real. Irene knew that. And so did Ethan. One afternoon, as they sat in a park, sharing an ice cream cone, Ethan turned to her and asked, "I've been thinking. Do you want to take a trip together? Maybe somewhere far away. Just the two of us. What do you think?" Irene felt a thrill run through her at the idea. A trip, just the two of them, away from everything. It sounded perfect. "I'd love that," she said, her eyes lighting up. "Where are we going?" Ethan smiled, a mischievous glint in his eye. I was thinking we could go to the coast. Maybe rent a cabin by the beach. Just relax, spend time together. Irene smiled back, feeling a rush of excitement. That sounds amazing, she said. I can't wait. As the days passed, Irene couldn't shake the feeling that everything was falling into place. With Ethan, she had found something she hadn't known she was looking for. It wasn't just about love, it was about companionship, trust, and the kind of connection that made everything else feel insignificant. She was no longer afraid of the future, no longer afraid of taking the next step. With Ethan, she knew she was ready for whatever came next. They had a future, one they would build together, one step at a time. And for the first time in her life, Irene felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. Irene and Ethan's trip to the coast came sooner than either of them expected. The idea of a quiet retreat by the beach, away from their everyday lives, felt like the perfect way to spend more time together and to build on the connection that had grown so naturally between them. Irene had always loved the idea of a beach vacation, and the thought of being alone with Ethan, surrounded by the sound of the ocean and the calmness of nature, made her feel like she was exactly where she was meant to be. As they arrived at the small, cozy cabin by the beach, Irene could already feel the stress from her daily life melting away. The air was fresh and salty, and the rhythmic sound of the waves crashing against the shore was soothing. The cabin was simple, with wooden floors and large windows that gave a perfect view of the ocean. It was exactly what they needed, a place to disconnect from everything and reconnect with each other. They unpacked their things, and after a short time, they found themselves walking along the beach hand in hand, the cool water lapping at their feet. This is perfect, Irene said, her eyes closing for a moment as she took in the beauty of the scene. Ethan smiled beside her, his hand warm in hers. I'm glad you like it, he said. I thought it would be the perfect place for us to just unwind, no distractions. They spent the rest of the afternoon walking along the beach, collecting seashells, and talking about everything and nothing. It was the kind of conversation that felt easy, natural, as if they had known each other for years. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, they sat on the sand, watching the waves. This is incredible, Irene said quietly, her voice soft as she leaned against Ethan. He wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. I know, he replied, his voice low. I've always wanted to do something like this, to just escape for a while. And I'm glad we're doing it together. Irene smiled, her heart full. She had spent so many years focused on work, on the next task, the next deadline, that she had forgotten how to just be in the moment. But with Ethan, it felt different. It felt like they didn't need anything else but each other. After a peaceful evening by the fire, they woke up early the next morning, eager to explore more of the area. They rented bicycles and rode along the coast, stopping at little cafes and enjoying the quiet, peaceful surroundings. The days seemed to stretch out endlessly, full of simple joys and shared experiences. On the third day of their trip, as they sat on the porch of the cabin watching the sunset, Ethan turned to Irene with a serious look in his eyes. Irene, I've been thinking a lot about us, he began, his voice steady. Irene looked at him, sensing that something important was coming. What about us? She asked softly, her heart beating faster. Ethan took a deep breath before continuing. I want you to know that I'm not just here for the short term. I've been with people before, and I've felt a connection, but with you, it's different. It's real. I care about you more than I've ever cared about anyone, and I want to build something lasting with you. I want a future with you, Irene. Irene's heart skipped a beat. She had known for a while now that Ethan was serious about her, but hearing him say it so openly, so confidently, made everything feel even more real. She swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. I care about you too, Ethan, she said, her voice shaking slightly. I've never felt this way before. I've been afraid to let myself trust someone, but with you, it feels like I can. And I want to see where this goes, together. Ethan's face softened, and he reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. I'm glad to hear that, he said. Because I believe in us. I believe in what we have, and I want to take it to the next level. Irene felt a rush of emotion, a mix of excitement and vulnerability. She had always been so cautious, so afraid of getting hurt, but with Ethan, she felt like she was ready to take that leap. "I'm ready too," she whispered, her voice full of quiet hope. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of shared smiles, gentle laughter, and soft touches. As they sat on the porch, watching the stars appear in the sky above them, Irene felt a sense of peace she had never known before. This was real. They were building something, slowly and steadily, with trust and understanding. She wasn't sure where this journey would lead, but with Ethan by her side, she was no longer afraid of the future. She was ready to embrace it. The days at the beach were exactly what they needed, a reminder that sometimes the simplest moments were the most meaningful. As they packed up to leave the cabin, Irene couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude for this time they had spent together. It had been more than just a vacation, it had been a turning point in their relationship. They had shared something meaningful, something that felt like a foundation they could build on. As they drove back home, the familiar roads leading them back to reality, Irene glanced at Ethan, her heart full. "This has been perfect," she said softly. Ethan smiled at her, his eyes filled with affection. "It has been," he agreed. "And this is just the beginning, Irene. We have so much more to look forward to." Irene smiled back, feeling a sense of warmth spread through her. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of what the future held. With Ethan by her side, she knew they could face anything together. Irene and Ethan's relationship had continued to grow stronger since their trip to the coast. With every passing day, they seemed to fall deeper into a rhythm, each of them learning more about the other, and in turn, learning more about themselves. The connection they shared felt genuine, built on a foundation of trust, mutual respect, and understanding. They spent their days together in a comfortable, easy manner, enjoying each other's company, whether it was over a quiet cup of coffee in the morning or an adventurous afternoon in the city. Irene felt herself opening up in ways she hadn't before, letting go of the walls she had built around her heart over the years. She knew that with Ethan, it was different. She wasn't afraid to love him, and for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of getting hurt. One evening, as the days started to get shorter and the weather cooler, Irene and Ethan decided to take a weekend getaway to a small cabin in the mountains. The air had a crisp bite to it, and the thought of being surrounded by nature, far from the distractions of their busy lives, sounded like the perfect escape. They arrived at the cabin late in the afternoon, the sun beginning to dip below the horizon, casting the landscape in soft, golden hues. The cabin was tucked away in the woods, nestled among towering pine trees. The atmosphere felt peaceful, almost magical, and as they stepped inside, Irene could feel the weight of the world lifting off her shoulders. It was just the two of them in this quiet, secluded place. "This is perfect," Irene said as she looked around, taking in the cozy interior. "I'm glad you like it," Ethan replied with a smile, already beginning to light the fireplace. "I thought it would be the perfect place for us to unwind." They spent the evening cooking dinner together, laughing as they prepared the meal. It was simple, but it felt special, made all the more meaningful by the shared experience. As they ate, they talked about everything, about their hopes for the future, their dreams, their fears, and everything in between. The conversation was easy, natural, and Irene couldn't help but feel grateful for the way Ethan listened, truly listened, to everything she said. After dinner, they sat by the fire, the warmth of the flames a comforting contrast to the chill in the air. Irene leaned back against Ethan, feeling his steady presence beside her. The crackling fire and the gentle rustling of the trees outside created a peaceful soundtrack to their evening. As the night wore on, they talked more, occasionally drifting into comfortable silence. Ethan's hand found hers, and they simply sat together, the world outside seeming to fade away. "I've been thinking," Ethan said after a while, his voice soft and serious. Irene turned her head slightly to look at him, her curiosity piqued. "What about?" she asked. "About us," he replied. "About how we've been moving forward together. I've been thinking about how much I care about you, Irene." Irene's heart skipped a beat. She had known, of course, how much he meant to her, but hearing him say it out loud always left her breathless. I care about you too, she said softly, squeezing his hand. More than I've ever cared about anyone. Ethan smiled, the warmth in his eyes making Irene feel like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. I know we've been taking things slow, he said, his voice steady, but I don't want to take this for granted. I want to be with you, Irene. I want to build a future with you, no matter what that looks like. Irene felt a rush of emotion overwhelm her. She had never been one to jump into the unknown, but with Ethan, she felt like she could. I'm ready for that too, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I want that future with you, Ethan. Ethan's expression softened, and he pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Then we'll take it one step at a time, he said gently. No rush, no pressure. Just us, moving forward together. Irene smiled, feeling like the words she had been longing to hear had finally arrived. It wasn't about rushing or forcing anything. It was about building something real, something lasting, and she was ready for it. The next few days passed in a blissful haze. They explored the surrounding woods, hiked to the top of a nearby hill for breathtaking views, and spent long hours simply enjoying each other's company. Every moment seemed to deepen their bond, and Irene realized that she was no longer holding back. She was in this, wholeheartedly, and she was ready to see where it would take them. As they packed up to leave the cabin, Irene felt a mix of emotions. She was sad to leave the peaceful mountain retreat, but she was also excited to return home, to continue building the life she was beginning to share with Ethan. As they drove back to the city, the familiar roads ahead, Irene looked over at Ethan, her heart full. This has been perfect, she said, her voice soft but full of sincerity. Ethan glanced at her, his smile warm and full of affection. It really has, he agreed. And this is just the beginning, Irene. We've got a whole future ahead of us. Irene smiled back, feeling the weight of his words. With Ethan by her side, she knew she was ready for whatever came next. Together, they had already built something meaningful, and she knew that the best was yet to come. Irene and Ethan had now been together for several months, and their relationship continued to flourish. The connection they had built was unlike anything Irene had experienced before, steady, fulfilling, and grounded in trust. It wasn't just the moments of grand gestures or perfect days, but the little things that made them stronger every day. They had a rhythm that felt easy, a shared understanding that didn't need words, and yet they continued to learn new things about each other with every conversation. As much as she had feared it in the beginning, Irene found herself embracing the future, not with uncertainty, but with excitement. They spent their weekends together, visiting local farmers' markets, cooking meals, or simply spending time in each other's company. The more time they spent together, the more it became clear that this was more than just a relationship, it was a partnership. One evening, as they sat on the couch after dinner, Ethan turned to Irene, a look of thoughtfulness on his face. I've been thinking, he said, his voice serious but warm. Irene looked up from her phone, sensing the change in his tone. About what? She asked, her curiosity piqued. Ethan took a deep breath before continuing, his eyes steady. About how much you've come to mean to me. I know we've been talking about taking things slow, and I respect that. But I think I'm ready to take the next step, Irene. I want you to know that I'm serious about us. I don't want to keep things casual anymore. I want us to build a future together. Irene's heart skipped a beat at his words. It wasn't that she hadn't felt the same way, but hearing him say it out loud made it feel all the more real. She set her phone down and met his gaze, her emotions welling up. I've been thinking about the same thing, she said softly. I've never felt more sure about anything in my life. I want a future with you, Ethan. I want this, whatever this turns into. Ethan's eyes softened, and he took her hand gently in his. Then let's do it, he said with a smile. Let's take the next step, together. Irene smiled, her chest swelling with affection for him. She felt like they were at the start of something new, something deeper. It wasn't about rushing, and it wasn't about having all the answers. It was about moving forward, together, step by step. Over the next few weeks, their conversations turned to future plans, dreams, and goals. They talked about the kind of life they wanted to build together. Ethan had always been driven and successful in his career, and Irene had worked hard to build a stable life of her own. But now, they were starting to see a new picture, one that included both of them, not just as individuals, but as partners. They weren't just thinking about what they could accomplish on their own, but what they could create together. As the weeks passed, the bond between them grew even stronger. They began to make plans for the future, everything from traveling to new places, to finding a home together. They weren't rushing into anything, but it was clear that they were on the same page about what they wanted. One evening, after another quiet dinner at home, Irene found herself reflecting on just how far they had come. She sat on the couch, her legs tucked under her, as Ethan sat beside her, scrolling through his phone. She watched him for a moment, her mind wandering. She had always been afraid of the future, afraid of opening herself up to someone fully, but with Ethan, it felt right. It felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Ethan looked over at her, noticing the distant look in her eyes. "What's on your mind?" he asked, his voice gentle. Irene smiled softly, her heart warm at the concern in his tone. "Just thinking about us," she said. "I can't believe how far we've come. It feels like everything is falling into place." Ethan put his phone down and turned toward her, his expression serious but filled with affection. "I'm glad to hear that," he said softly. "I felt the same way. I know we've had our doubts, but I think we've found something special here, Irene. And I want to keep building on that." Irene's heart swelled at his words. She had always been someone who questioned the future, who worried about the unknown. But now, with Ethan by her side, she felt ready to face whatever came next. "I feel the same," she whispered. "I think we're on the right path." They spent the rest of the evening talking, discussing everything from small plans to big dreams. It wasn't about defining every moment or planning every step, it was about knowing that whatever they did, they would do it together. The next few days were filled with a sense of excitement, as they continued to discuss their future. They decided to take the next step in their relationship, not rushing, but creating something lasting and meaningful. One afternoon, while walking through the park, Ethan stopped and turned to her with a smile. "I have an idea," he said, his tone playful. Irene raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" she asked. Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small key, holding it up for her to see. "I was thinking," he said, his voice warm with affection, "that maybe it's time we start looking for a place. A home. Together." Irene felt a rush of emotions at the thought. They had already built a life together in so many ways, this felt like the next natural step. "I think that's a great idea," she said, her voice filled with hope and excitement. "Let's do it." And so, they began their next adventure together, not just as a couple, but as two people ready to build a future. It wasn't about rushing, it wasn't about perfection, it was about making the decision to take that next step, side by side. Irene and Ethan spent the next few months planning their future together. The house search became an exciting new chapter in their relationship. They looked at countless homes, each one bringing them closer to the idea of creating a space that was truly theirs. The journey was full of laughter, a few minor disagreements, and moments of pure joy as they envisioned what their life would look like in a home they could call their own. After weeks of searching, they finally found it, the perfect house, tucked in a quiet neighborhood with a large backyard, a cozy living room, and a kitchen that was perfect for their shared love of cooking. It wasn't perfect in the way movies depict perfect homes, but to Irene and Ethan, it was everything they had dreamed of. It felt like a place where they could build their life, make memories, and grow old together. They moved in and spent their first night in the house, sitting together on the floor in the living room, surrounded by boxes. The house felt empty in some ways, but it was full of possibility. "I can't believe we're finally here," Irene said, her voice filled with awe. Ethan smiled, looking around at their new space. "I know. It's ours. And this is just the beginning." They spent the next few weeks settling into their new home, decorating, unpacking, and organizing. Each day brought new little moments, like their first dinner in the new kitchen, the laughter they shared while putting together furniture, and the quiet mornings spent with coffee, reading the newspaper, or simply talking about everything and nothing. The house began to feel more and more like home with every passing day. As time went on, their connection continued to deepen. They faced challenges, as any couple does, but they did so together. They learned how to navigate the ups and downs of life, supporting each other through it all. The love they shared was rooted in a strong foundation, one built on mutual respect, trust, and an unspoken understanding that they were in this together for the long haul. One evening, after a long day, Ethan came home with a small box wrapped in a simple ribbon. He sat down next to Irene on the couch, his face serious but soft with affection. "I got you something," he said, handing her the box. Irene looked at him curiously before gently unwrapping it. Inside was a delicate silver necklace with a small, heart-shaped pendant. She looked at him, surprised and touched by the gesture. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice full of emotion. "Thank you." Ethan smiled, taking her hand in his. "It's just a reminder, Irene," he said quietly. "A reminder that no matter what, I'm always going to be here. Always." Irene's heart swelled as she looked at the necklace, then back at Ethan. She had never felt so sure of anything in her life. "I'm here too, Ethan," she said, her voice steady. "And I'm so grateful for you. For us." Ethan leaned forward, kissing her gently. "We've come a long way," he said softly, pulling her into his arms. "And I can't wait to see where we go from here." In the months that followed, they continued to build a life that was rich with love, laughter, and the joy of simply being together. They traveled, started new projects around the house, and made more memories that would last a lifetime. Their relationship wasn't perfect, but it was real. And that was enough. As Irene stood in the kitchen one evening, looking out the window at the backyard, she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. This life, this love with Ethan, was everything she had hoped for and more. They had created something beautiful together, something that had transformed from a dream into a reality. And as she turned to see Ethan walking through the door, a smile on his face, she knew that the journey was just beginning. With him by her side, the future didn't feel so uncertain anymore. It felt full of possibility. They had already built a strong foundation, and now, it was time to continue building. Together.